Between 1837 and 1901, Victorian Britain saw unimaginable wealth alongside crushing poverty, creating two worlds separated by just a few streets. The richest lived in opulent mansions with dozens of servants, while the poorest crammed into filthy single rooms with entire families. Here's what life was really like for the richest and poorest in Victorian England. So, yeah, if these stories help you sleep, hit subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Comment your location and time. I always read them thinking, wait, people in New Zealand listen to history stories to sleep? Alright, tonight it's Victorian England, but hold on. Get comfortable first. Seriously, take a second. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. You're not going to want to move once we start. Your eyes flutter open to darkness. For a moment, you're confused. Then reality crashes in. You're in a four-poster bed in 1860s London, and you're obscenely wealthy. The Egyptian cotton sheets beneath you cost more than most people make in a month. The mattress is stuffed with the finest horsehair, not the cheap straw that breaks down after a year. Unlike your modern memory foam that cradles you perfectly, this bed is firm but still absurdly comfortable compared to what 90% of Londoners are sleeping on right now. It's still dark, but the blackness is softening around the edges. Maybe 5 a.m? Not that it matters, you won't be getting yourself out of bed, that's what the servants are for. Good morning, my lord. The voice comes from the doorway as the door silently swings open. One of your footmen, William, you think, though honestly you have trouble keeping track of them all, enters carrying a silver candlestick. Behind him is your valet, Jenkins, who's been with you for 15 years. William lights the gas lamps while Jenkins prepares your morning routine. "It's going to be a fine day, sir," Jenkins says as he lays out your morning clothes. "Perhaps the blue waistcoat today?" You mumble something affirmative and sink back into the pillows for a few more minutes of warmth. Your bedroom is massive, probably 40 feet square with 14-foot ceilings. The fireplace across from your bed is taller than most men, and William is already stoking it to chase away the morning chill. Here's the thing about being rich in Victorian England. You're never alone. Never. There's always someone hovering, waiting, watching. Privacy is actually something the poor have more of, if only because no one cares what they're doing. Wait, let me back up a bit. This is one bedroom in your London townhouse, one of your 3 homes. You've got this place in Belgravia, the country estate in Hampshire where your family has lived for 11 generations, and the hunting lodge in Scotland. The London house alone has 32 rooms and requires 17 full-time servants to run properly. And that's actually modest compared to some of the true aristocracy. "Will you be attending Lord Hartington's dinner this evening, sir?" Jenkins asks as he helps you into your dressing gown. It's silk, of course, with embroidery that took some poor woman weeks to complete. You're paying her a fair wage, though. You're not a monster. "Yes, I suppose I must," you reply, making your way to the washstand where a porcelain basin of warm water awaits. "Lady Elizabeth will be there." Jenkins nods knowingly. Lady Elizabeth is the daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland, and your mother has been not so subtly pushing you toward a match. She comes with an impressive dowry, impeccable bloodlines, and, from what you've seen at previous social events, the personality of a wet dishcloth. But such is life in your social circle. Marriage is business, not romance. "Very good, sir. I'll prepare your evening attire accordingly." Speaking of attire, let's talk about the ridiculous amount of clothing you wear. Right now, you're just putting on your morning outfit, which is considered casual but would be formal by today's standards. You start with a linen shirt, followed by wool trousers, held up by suspenders. Then comes the waistcoat, the jacket, and the cravat, which Jenkins ties with expert precision. For footwear, you have leather boots that cost as much as a labourer makes in 3 months. And this is just your morning outfit. You'll change clothes at least 3 more times today. I know. You're thinking, this sounds exhausting. But remember, you're not doing any of this yourself. Jenkins is dressing you like you're a life-sized doll. While this is happening, the rest of the house is already humming with activity. The servants have been up since 4:30 a.m, preparing for the day. The cook and kitchen maids are making breakfast. The housemaids are dusting the drawing rooms and parlours. The footmen are polishing silver. The stable boys are tending to your horses. You make your way downstairs to the morning room where breakfast is served. Your wife is already there, looking immaculate despite the early hour. She too has been attended to by her lady's maid, who spent nearly an hour arranging her hair and helping her into her morning dress. "Good morning, my dear," she says, not looking up from her correspondence. She has several letters open in front of her, invitations to balls, charity events and afternoon teas. The social calendar of a wealthy Victorian woman is relentlessly full. The breakfast table is laden with food: eggs, bacon, kidneys, fish, toast, muffins, and fresh fruit. In an era before refrigeration, this spread represents significant work and expense. Your cook has been preparing since dawn, and the food is kept warm on heated serving trays. "Jenkins tells me we're attending the Hartingtons tonight," your wife says, finally looking up. She's pretty in that particular Victorian way: pale skin, a small waist cinched even smaller by her corset, and a serene expression that reveals nothing of her true thoughts. "Yes, I thought we might," you reply, helping yourself to some eggs. A footman immediately appears to pour you tea. "Lady Elizabeth will be there," she says with a small smile. "Your wife is well aware of your mother's matchmaking efforts on behalf of your brother, and her cousin, Lord James. He's quite handsome, I hear." You raise an eyebrow at her teasing. This is what passes for humour in your marriage: gentle, proper, and never inappropriate. You've been married for 12 years, a match arranged by your parents. She brought land and connections to the marriage, you brought title and wealth. It's worked out better than many such arrangements. You're fond of each other, if not passionately in love. Okay, hold that picture in your mind. Now let's completely flip the script. Same morning, same city, but you're not waking up in Belgravia. You're waking up in Seven Dials, one of London's most notorious slums. Your eyes open to darkness, but it's not the peaceful darkness of a well-appointed bedroom. It's the murky gloom of a basement room shared with 8 other people. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, coal smoke, and the ever-present stench from the open sewer that runs along your street. You're not lying on Egyptian cotton, you're on a pile of rags on the floor. If you're lucky, you have a thin, straw-filled mattress that you share with at least 2 siblings. The single, small window near the ceiling is crusted with dirt, but it hardly matters. The view is just the feet of people walking by on the street above. There's no servant to wake you gently. Instead, it's your mother's harsh voice. Up now, or there'll be no work. No work means no money. No money means no food. It's that simple. You roll off your makeshift bed, your body already aching. You're 10 years old, but you look 7 due to malnutrition. Your job as a chimney sweep means you need to be small, though. Fat children can't squeeze up the narrow chimney flues. Unlike your wealthy counterpart across town, your morning ablutions are brief. There's a cracked basin with yesterday's water, which you share with your siblings. You splash your face, not that it matters. You'll be covered in soot within hours. Breakfast, a chunk of bread, if you're lucky, maybe a bit of dripping, congealed fat to spread on it if times are good, tea so weak you can see through it, already made by your mother who's been up since 4 a.m. preparing to go to her job as a washerwoman. Hurry now, she says, handing you the bread. Her hands are red and raw from lye soap and hot water. At 35 she looks 60, her body broken by poverty and labour. Mr. Jenkins won't wait, and there's others who want your position. Mr. Jenkins, not the valet from our other story, but the chimney sweep master who essentially owns you for the next 7 years through your apprenticeship. You were sold to him when you were 7 because your family couldn't feed you. He's supposed to teach you a trade, house you, and feed you. In reality, he works you nearly to death, beats you regularly, and feeds you just enough to keep you alive. You pull on your only set of clothes, the same ones you wore yesterday and the day before. They're stiff with dirt and soot. No fancy outfit changes for you. These clothes will stay on until they literally fall apart, at which point they'll be roughly mended and put back on. Your mother looks you over and sighs. Try to come back with something today, she says. What she means is try to steal something from the houses where you clean chimneys. A silver spoon, a handkerchief, anything that can be sold or pawned. It's dangerous. You could be transported to Australia or even hanged for theft. But hunger is a powerful motivator. You nod and slip out into the London dawn. The streets are already busy with workers, men and women heading to factories, street vendors setting up their carts, night soil men who collect human waste, finishing their disgusting rounds. The air is thick with coal smoke, creating the infamous London fog that's actually more like smog. It clings to your skin and clothes, gets in your lungs, burns your eyes, but it's just part of life. You barely notice it anymore. You weave through the narrow streets toward Mr. Jenkins' shop. 7 Dials is a maze of tenements and shops, the buildings leaning toward each other as if conspiring. In some places, you can stretch out your arms and touch buildings on both sides of the alley. The streets are filthy. Garbage, animal waste, human waste in some cases. The sewage system is primitive at best, non-existent at worst. Disease is a constant companion in neighbourhoods like yours. Cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis. They claim lives every day, especially children's lives. You've already lost 3 siblings, which actually makes your family fortunate compared to many. You arrive at Mr. Jenkins's shop just as he's unlocking the door. He's a massive man with hands like hams and breath that reeks of gin, even this early in the morning. You're late, he growls, cuffing you on the ear hard enough to make you see stars. You're not late, you're actually early on, but arguing would just earn you another blow. Inside, the other sweeps are gathering, all boys, all small, all with the same hollow-eyed look of constant hunger and fear. The youngest is 5, a tiny slip of a boy who still cries for his mother sometimes. The oldest is 14, but small for his age. Once boys get too big for the chimneys, they're turned out with no skills except climbing. Many become pickpockets or worse. Right then, Mr. Jenkins says, gathering his tools, brushes, scraping tools, bags to collect the soot. Soot is valuable. It can be sold for fertilizer or to make black pigment. That's part of how Mr. Jenkins makes his money on top of what he charges for your services. Parker, you take the new boy to Lady Morrison's place on Wimpole Street. Do all the kitchen chimneys and the main parlour. And mind you do it right. Lady Morrison complained last time. Parker, the 14-year-old, nods grimly. Lady Morrison's chimneys are narrow and run hot. It's dangerous work, but all chimney sweeping is dangerous. Boys get stuck and suffocate. They fall. Their lungs are destroyed by soot, leading to the painful death known as chimney sweep's cancer. And yet, as awful as chimney sweeping is, you're actually considered fortunate compared to some children. Factory work can be even more dangerous, children losing limbs in machinery or slowly being poisoned in match factories. Mine work means days spent in complete darkness, breathing coal dust, crawling through tunnels too small for adults. As you follow Parker through the awakening streets of London, your path takes you briefly through a wealthier area, and there you spot him, the gentleman from our other story, stepping into his carriage for his morning ride. For a brief moment, your eyes meet. He looks away first, uncomfortable with your gaze. To him, you're barely human. A necessary bit of the urban machinery that keeps his world running smoothly. You're both breathing the same London air, walking the same London streets, but you might as well be living on different planets. Parker nudges you, breaking the moment. "Come on then," he says, "them chimneys won't sweep themselves." And so your workday begins. Climbing up into hot, narrow, soot-filled spaces where you could easily die, all so the wealthy can have clean, efficient fires to keep their many rooms warm. That's Victorian England for you, a place of staggering inequality where a few streets can separate unimaginable luxury from desperate squalor, where some children are raised to rule empires while others are worked to death before they reach adulthood. Back in the wealthy home, breakfast is concluding. You, the wealthy you, have business to attend to. As a gentleman, you don't actually work in the common sense. You manage your estates, make investment decisions, and perhaps hold a seat in Parliament, or serve as a magistrate. These are all considered appropriate occupations for a man of your station. Today, you'll be meeting with your solicitor about some property investments, then your club for lunch, then perhaps a ride in the park if the weather holds. Your wife has her own schedule, charity committee meetings, visits to less fortunate relatives who are still quite comfortable by normal standards, perhaps some shopping or social calls. Don't forget we have the Hendersons for tea before the Hartingtons' dinner, your wife reminds you as you prepare to leave. Social obligations are constant and cannot be ignored without consequences. Of course, my dear, I'll be back by 4, you reply, kissing her gloved hand, a proper display of affection for a Victorian gentleman. Your butler hands you your hat, gloves and walking stick as you exit through the front door. Your carriage awaits, the horses groomed to perfection, the coachman in livery. As you settle into the leather seat, you glance out the window and see a chimney sweep, a small, ragged boy covered in soot. For a moment, your eyes meet, and something uncomfortable stirs in your chest. Then the carriage moves forward, and the moment passes. The two Londons continue their parallel existence, one of privilege, comfort, and excess, the other of deprivation, struggle, and bare survival, and most days neither truly sees the other. I don't know about you, but when I think about Victorian England, I find myself wondering which world I would have been born into. The odds say the poorer one. The vast majority of people lived lives of hardship. The fancy balls and fine country homes we see in period dramas, those were for the tiniest sliver of society. I mean, imagine getting up in the morning and having someone else dress you. Actually, don't try to picture that too clearly. It's weird, right? Like, there's a grown man whose entire job is to put your pants on for you. That's got to be awkward the first few dozen times. But then again, imagine being that little chimney sweep, climbing up into spaces so narrow your shoulders get stuck sometimes, breathing in that soot day after day, knowing that most boys in your position don't make it to adulthood. Suddenly having someone put your pants on doesn't seem so bad. That's the thing about history. It's easy to romanticize the past when you're only looking at one slice of it. The truth is always more complicated, more uncomfortable. As the day progresses in both worlds, the contrasts only become more stark. The wealthy family's day unfolds with leisure and comfort. Meetings conducted in well-appointed offices, lunch at exclusive clubs, perhaps some shopping at fine establishments where shopkeepers bow and scrape. Every need is anticipated and met, often before they're even aware of the need themselves. Meanwhile, the chimney sweep's day is a brutal marathon of physical suffering. Climbing, scraping, choking on soot, burns from hot flues, cuts from broken bricks, the constant fear of getting stuck, all for a few pennies that will mostly go to the master sweep, with perhaps a crust of bread as your midday meal. And the worst part, this system seemed perfectly natural to the Victorians. The idea that society was divided into distinct classes with different rights and expectations was taken for granted. The rich genuinely believed they deserved their comfort, that it was the natural order of things. And many of the poor accepted their lot as inevitable, focusing on day-to-day survival rather than questioning why their children were dying while others thrived. It would take decades of reform movements, labour organising and social awakening to begin addressing these inequalities. The seeds were being planted during the Victorian era, but the harvest would come much later. As night falls across London, both our characters prepare for sleep, one in a soft, clean bed with fresh sheets and a full stomach, the other on a pile of rags, body aching, stomach growling, same city, same time, different worlds. And as you lie in your comfortable modern bed, perhaps give a thought to which world you might have inhabited had you been born in Victorian London. The odds are you'd have been much closer to our little chimney sweep than to the gentleman in his townhouse. Something to be grateful for as you drift off to sleep. But for now, we'll leave both our Victorian Londoners to their rest and continue their story tomorrow. The contrast between their lives will only become more apparent as we follow them through work, leisure, education and more. Victorian England was a society of stark divisions, where your birth determined your destiny in ways we can barely comprehend today. In your cosy bed, with your full stomach and access to modern medicine, you're already living a life that even the wealthiest Victorian would envy in some ways. Keep that thought close as you drift off to sleep, surrounded by comforts that would seem magical to people just a few generations ago. The morning light streams through the ornate windows of your study, casting long rectangles across the Turkish carpet. It's 10 a.m. and you've been working for nearly an hour now. I put working in quotes because what constitutes work for a wealthy Victorian gentleman would barely qualify as effort to most people. You sit at a massive mahogany desk reviewing accounts from your country estates. The numbers are presented in perfect columns by your land agent, who actually does the real work of managing your property. Your job is essentially to read his reports and make occasional decisions about investments or improvements. Your butler enters after a discreet knock. "Mr. Harrington has arrived, sir." You look up from your papers. "Ah, yes, show him in." Mr. Harrington is your solicitor, essentially your lawyer and financial advisor rolled into one. He's middle class, educated at a good but not great school, and makes a comfortable living managing legal affairs for gentlemen like yourself. He enters with a deferential nod, clutching a leather portfolio. "Good morning, my lord. I trust I find you well." "Quite well, Harrington. What news on the Manchester property?" Mr. Harrington takes a seat across from you and opens his portfolio. "Most promising, sir. The factory is now fully operational and the first quarter's profits exceed our projections by nearly 15%. What he doesn't mention, and what you don't ask about, are the conditions inside that factory. The 14-hour workdays, the child labourers, the dangerous machinery with no safety features, the pitiful wages. That's not your concern. Your concern is the 15% above projections." "Excellent," you say, allowing yourself a small smile. "And the railway shares?" also performing admirably. The new line to Bristol has increased in value by 20% since your initial investment. And so it goes. A catalogue of your money making more money, all without you having to do anything resembling actual labour. This is the Victorian gentleman's ideal, to live off investments, property and inherited wealth. To dirty one's hands with trade or manufacturing is considered vulgar, though many aristocrats secretly invest in such enterprises through intermediaries like Mr. Harrington. You're not a totally useless person, though. You serve as a magistrate in your country district, sitting in judgment over poachers and petty thieves. You hold a seat in Parliament, though you rarely attend except for important votes. You're a patron of several charities, donating money and occasionally attending fundraising events. You consider these activities your contribution to society, your noblesse oblige. The meeting with Mr. Harrington concludes after about an hour. You've made decisions involving thousands of pounds, more money than a factory worker would see in a lifetime, with nothing more strenuous than a few signatures and nods. Will that be all, sir? Your butler asks as Mr. Harrington departs. Yes, thank you, Wilson. I believe I'll head to my club for lunch. Your work day is effectively over before noon. Time for leisure. Meanwhile, across London, our chimney sweep is in the middle of his third chimney of the day. The flue is narrow and twisting, barely wider than his shoulders. The brick is rough against his skin, scraping him raw in places. Soot fills his eyes and mouth, despite the handkerchief tied over his face. The heat is intense. This chimney was used just yesterday, and the bricks still hold warmth. Move faster, boy. The shout echoes up from below, where the master sweep waits impatiently. We've got 4 more houses after this one. The boy, let's call him Tom, doesn't waste breath responding. He needs every ounce of energy to keep moving upward, using his elbows and knees to brace against the sides of the flue. His small brush scrapes at the soot, sending it cascading down into the fireplace below. This is dangerous work. Just last month, a boy from a neighbouring sweep business got stuck in a chimney. By the time they broke through the wall to reach him, he had suffocated. It happens more often than anyone acknowledges. Tom finally reaches the top, his head poking out into blessed fresh air for a moment. London spreads out below him, a forest of chimneys and rooftops shrouded in coal smoke. For a brief instant he feels something like freedom, perched above the city that otherwise crushes him. But there's no time to enjoy the view. He needs to make his way back down, which is often more dangerous than going up. One slip and he could fall the entire height of the chimney. When he finally emerges into the kitchen fireplace, he's covered head to toe in black soot. Only the whites of his eyes and the pink of his tongue show through when he coughs. "Took you long enough," the master sweep grumbles. "Clean yourself up enough not to track soot, then on to the next one." The kitchen maid gives him a sympathetic look and hands him a cup of water and a chunk of bread when the master's back is turned. It's a small kindness, but in Tom's world, small kindnesses are everything. "Thank you, miss," he whispers, gulping down the water and stuffing the bread into his pocket for later. "You're welcome, little man," she says. "My brother was a sweep before he got too big. I know how it is." Tom nods gratefully. There's a camaraderie among the working poor, a recognition of shared struggle that creates moments of connection amid the hardship. As Tom follows his master out onto the street, they pass a gentleman stepping into a handsome carriage. "It's you, the wealthy you, heading to your club for lunch." Your eyes slide past Tom without really seeing him, just another smudge in the urban landscape. You arrive at your club, an exclusive establishment on Pall Mall, where membership is strictly controlled. No trade allowed, only gentlemen of proper breeding and connections. The doorman greets you by name, taking your hat and gloves. Inside, it's like a palace dedicated to masculine comfort. Deep leather chairs, polished wood, the smell of good tobacco and brandy. The dining room gleams with crystal and silver. You join several acquaintances for lunch, and the conversation flows between politics, business, and the upcoming social season. "I hear Lady Elizabeth will be at the Hartingtons tonight," mentions Lord Pembroke, a ruddy-faced peer with whom you share some railway investments. "So I'm told," you reply noncommittally. "Fine family, the Westmorlands, bloodlines as old as any in England." He gives you a knowing look. "And the girl's dowry is said to be substantial." You offer a tight smile. "Your personal finances are excellent, but no gentleman would turn down a substantial dowry. Marriage in your circle is as much a business transaction as an emotional union." Lunch is 5 courses: soup, fish, meat, dessert, and cheese, accompanied by fine wines. The food is exquisite, prepared by a French chef who commands a salary higher than most government officials. You eat until pleasantly full, then retire to the smoking room for brandy and cigars. This is the work of a wealthy Victorian man: meetings, meals, social connections. The real labour that generates your wealth happens far away, performed by people you'll never meet. Tom's lunch is the chunk of bread from the kitchen maid, eaten hastily between chimneys. It's barely enough to keep him going, but he's used to hunger. His master doesn't stop for a proper meal. Time is money, and there are chimneys to sweep. By mid-afternoon, Tom has cleaned 5 chimneys. His body aches, his lungs burn, and he's covered in cuts and bruises. But the day isn't over. There's one more house, this one with a particularly difficult chimney that twists at an odd angle. "You'll need the brush with the long handle for this one," his master tells him, handing him the tool. "And be quick about it. Lady Harrington is hosting a dinner tonight, and she wants her drawing room fire perfect." The name catches my attention. Lady Harrington, your wife. Tom is about to clean the chimney in your London home. He enters through the servants' entrance, careful to keep his sooty feet on the cloth path laid down by the housemaids specifically for this purpose. The house is a flurry of activity preparing for the evening's dinner party. Footmen polish silver, maids dust ornaments, the cook shouts orders in the kitchens. Tom is led to the main drawing room, a space larger than his entire tenement building. Crystal chandeliers hang from a ceiling painted with classical scenes. Silk wallpaper, gilded mirrors, and furniture that costs more than Tom's master will earn in his lifetime. And there she is, your wife, Lady Harrington, directing the placement of flower arrangements. She glances at Tom with a mixture of distaste and resignation. Chimney sweeps are a necessary evil, bringing filth into her immaculate home. "Be sure he doesn't soil anything," she instructs the housekeeper, "and have the maids dust again once he's finished." Tom is invisible, talked about as if he can't hear or understand. This is normal for him. The wealthy rarely address servants directly, and chimney sweeps are lower than servants. He sets to work on the drawing room chimney, aware that every eye is watching for mistakes. This chimney is particularly challenging. It hasn't been cleaned in months, and the flue narrows severely about halfway up. I need to pause here and talk about something many people don't know about Victorian chimney sweeps. See, chimneys get clogged with a substance called creosote, which is basically hardened tar from wood and coal smoke. It builds up inside chimneys and can catch fire if not removed regularly. When a chimney's really clogged, sweeps would sometimes resort to a horrifying practice. They'd send a boy up, and then they'd light a small fire below. The heat and smoke would drive the boy upward, forcing him to climb faster while scraping away the creosote. Children would get burned, suffocate, or fall trying to escape the heat and smoke. It was technically illegal by the 1840s, but it still happened, especially with difficult chimneys like the one Tom is facing. This one's proper stuck up. Tom's master mutters, examining the chimney. He glances around to make sure no household staff are nearby. Might need a bit of encouragement. Tom's heart sinks. He knows what that means. "Please, sir," he whispers, "I can do it proper without. Just need a bit more time." The master sweep considers, then nods curtly. 5 minutes, then we do it my way." Tom attacks the chimney with desperate energy, scraping and brushing, pushing his small body into spaces that would terrify most adults. He ignores the cuts from rough brick, the choking soot, the dizziness from poor air. Anything is better than encouragement. When he emerges, 15 minutes later, he's managed to clear the worst of the blockage. His master examines the work with a critical eye, then gives a grudging nod of approval. "It'll do. Get your things. We're finished for today." Tom gathers the brushes and soot bags with shaking hands. The close call has left him drained. As they leave through the servants' entrance, the cook, seeing his exhaustion, secretly hands him a meat pie wrapped in cloth. "For later," she whispers. "You look half-starved, child." It's another small kindness in a world that offers few. Tom clutches the pie like treasure, already imagining sharing it with his siblings later. As they exit onto the street, they pass you returning home to dress for dinner. You notice the chimney sweep leaving your house but think nothing of it. Just another service performed by the invisible hands that keep your world running smoothly. This is the reality of work in Victorian England. Some direct and supervise, others labour until their bodies break. Some earn in a minute what others won't see in a lifetime, and most accept this arrangement as natural, even divinely ordained. Now, let's shift gears and look at women's work in both worlds. Your wife doesn't work in the traditional sense. Her job is to manage the household, supervise the servants, maintain social connections, and represent the family's status through her appearance and conduct. It's not easy. Victorian high society has countless unwritten rules, and one misstep can damage a family's reputation. Today, after directing the preparations for tonight's dinner, she has correspondence to attend to. Seated at her writing desk, a delicate rosewood piece that cost more than a labourer's annual wage, she replies to invitations, writes thank you notes, and sends instructions to tradespeople. Her lady's maid stands nearby, ready to assist with any need. The relationship between a lady and her maid is often the closest one in her life, more intimate in many ways than her relationship with her husband. The maid knows all her secrets, helps her dress and undress, styles her hair, and often serves as a confidant. Jenkins says Lord James will be at the Hartingtons tonight. Your wife mentions to her maid as she seals a letter with wax. Indeed, my lady. The maid keeps her expression neutral, but there's a hint of interest in her voice. She knows her mistress finds Lord James amusing company. Yes, he's just returned from India, apparently. Should have some interesting stories. She selects another sheet of monogrammed stationery. The blue dress tonight, I think, with the pearls. An excellent choice, my lady. This is women's work in wealthy Victorian households, managing social connections, maintaining appearances, supervising servants. It's constrained and often tedious, but it comes with enormous privilege. Contrast this with the work of poor women like Tom's mother. She's been at the washing house since dawn, standing in steaming water mixed with harsh lye soap, scrubbing other people's linens until her hands bleed. The washing house is deafening, dozens of women pounding clothes, wringing them through mangles, shouting to be heard over the din. Her back aches from bending over the washtub, her hands are raw and cracked, and the steam has made her hair hang in damp strings around her face. She looks 20 years older than she is. For this brutal labour, she earns a few shillings, barely enough to feed her children, and she's actually fortunate compared to many women. At least washing is considered respectable work. Many poor women resort to prostitution when they can't earn enough from factory work or domestic service. The Victorian era's notorious double standard is on full display in attitudes toward women's work. Middle and upper class women are expected to remain in separate spheres from men. The home is their domain, and paid work would be shameful. Yet working class women must labour alongside men in factories, fields and workshops, often while also bearing full responsibility for home and children. By late afternoon, both our characters are finishing their work day. You return home to dress for dinner, assisted by Jenkins, who has laid out your evening clothes: black tailcoat, white waistcoat, starched shirt, and black trousers. Dressing for a formal dinner is a ritual that takes nearly an hour. "The new cologne from Paris has arrived, sir," Jenkins mentions, as he helps you into your shirt. "Would you care to try it this evening?" "Yes, why not?" You barely think about the cost of such luxuries. The cologne probably cost more than Tom's family pays in rent for a month. Downstairs, the house is transformed for evening. Chandeliers blaze with dozens of candles. Silver gleams on the dining table set for 12. Fresh flowers perfume the air. The staff moves with practiced precision, putting final touches on the dinner preparations. Your wife appears, resplendent in blue silk with pearls at her throat and wrists. Her waist, compressed by a tightly laced corset, looks impossibly small. Her hair is elaborately arranged, small diamond pins catching the light. "You look beautiful, my dear," you say, and mean it. Whatever the practical nature of your marriage, you can appreciate her beauty and the effort she makes to maintain appearances. "Thank you, Charles." She adjusts your cravat slightly. The carriage is ready whenever you are. Meanwhile, Tom has finally reached home, the basement room in 7 Dials. His siblings rush to greet him, their eyes lighting up when he produces the meat pie given to him by your cook. "Look what I got," he announces proudly. His mother smiles tiredly from where she sits by the small fire, her hands raw from the day's washing. "Bless you, child," she says, as she takes the pie and carefully cuts it into pieces, one for each family member, even divided among 5 people. It's a feast compared to their usual fare. As they eat, Tom recounts his day, the difficult chimneys, the brief view from the rooftops, the kind kitchen maid. He omits the scarier moments. His mother has enough to worry about. His younger sister, Mary, aged 8, shows him what she's learned at the Sunday school she attends. She can write her name now and recognise a few words. Education is their only hope for a better future, though the chances of getting enough schooling to make a difference are slim. After their meagre meal, Tom's mother reads aloud from a tattered Bible, one of the few books in their possession. Despite their hardships, there's love in this room, and moments of joy amid the struggle. They make the best of what they have, finding small pleasures where they can. But as they settle down to sleep, all 5 of them in one room, the contrast with your evening couldn't be more stark. You and your wife arrive at the Hartingtons' mansion in Mayfair, your carriage joining a line of similar vehicles disgorging finely dressed guests. Footmen in livery assist you from the carriage, and you enter a home even grander than your own. The evening ahead will include multiple courses of fine food, excellent wine, music, conversation, and social manoeuvring. You'll discuss politics, investments, and gossip about absent friends. You'll observe who's rising and falling in society's estimation. You might even further your acquaintance with Lady Elizabeth or her cousin Lord James. two worlds separated by just a few miles of London streets, two completely different experiences of work and reward, and neither fully sees or understands the other. I think about this divide sometimes when I'm stuck in traffic or waiting in a long line. I get annoyed, impatient. Then I remember Tom up in that chimney, or his mother standing in lye water for 14 hours. My hardships suddenly seem pretty trivial. Victorian England wasn't that long ago, just a few generations. Many of the social structures they created still influence our world today. The extreme inequality has diminished in some ways, increased in others, but the fundamental question remains: how do we value different kinds of work, and why do we accept such vast differences in reward? Something to ponder as you drift closer to sleep. In our next chapter, we'll explore how education differed between these two worlds and how it shaped the future possibilities for both rich and poor children in Victorian England. The next morning dawns in both households. Yours in Belgravia and Tom's in Seven Dials. The contrast in how the children of these two worlds spend their days is just as stark as everything else we've seen. In your wealthy home, your son William, let's say he's 12, wakes to the sound of his valet drawing the curtains. Yes, even children of the wealthy have their own servants in Victorian England. The boy yawns and stretches in his four-poster bed, his room nearly as large as Tom's entire home. "Good morning, Master William," says the valet, a young man named Peters, who serves as a combination of servant and companion to your son. "Mr. Crawford will be here at 9 for your Latin lesson." William groans. "Latin again? It's so boring." "Now, Master William," Peters says as he lays out the boy's clothes, "your father says a proper education is the foundation of a gentleman's life. And what constitutes a proper education for a boy of William's class? A curriculum focused on classical studies, Latin, Greek, mathematics, history and literature, not because these subjects have practical applications, but because they mark one as cultured and well-bred." The goal isn't to prepare William for a profession, gentlemen don't have professions, but to prepare him for university, probably Oxford or Cambridge, where he'll make connections with other young men of his class. For now, William is educated at home by a series of tutors who visit daily. Each is a specialist in his field, often a clergyman or university graduate who hasn't quite succeeded enough to secure a more prestigious position. They're paid well by your standards, but are firmly middle class, occupying an awkward position between servant and equal in your household. After a breakfast served in the nursery by a maid, eggs, toast, ham and hot chocolate, William settles into the schoolroom for his first lesson of the day. The schoolroom is a dedicated space filled with maps, globes, books and scientific instruments. One wall holds a massive bookshelf filled with educational texts and approved literature. Mr. Crawford arrives precisely at 9, a thin man in his 40s with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He carries a worn leather satchel containing textbooks and papers. "Good morning, Master William," he says formally. "I trust you've completed your translation of Cicero." William produces several sheets of paper covered in a neat, if reluctant, hand. The translation is mediocre. William finds Latin tedious, but Mr. Crawford won't criticise too harshly. The son of a wealthy family can't be treated like a common schoolboy, no matter how lazy his scholarship. Yes, Mr. Crawford says, scanning the work. Some errors here and here, but the general sense is correct. Now, let us move on to today's passage. And so begins 4 hours of education before lunch, followed by 3 more after. William will study mathematics with another tutor in the afternoon, then perhaps have a fencing or riding lesson if the weather permits. Physical education is considered important for boys of his class, not just for health, but to develop the bearing and skills expected of a gentleman. This education is expensive. Each tutor charges several guineas per week, but it's considered an essential investment in maintaining the family's social position. William isn't being prepared to earn a living, he's being prepared to manage the family estates and investments he'll eventually inherit, and to take his place in high society. Now, let's switch to Tom's morning. There's no valet, no private schoolroom, no tutors. Tom is already at work. We've established he's a chimney sweep. His education, such as it is, happens in stolen moments. His younger sister Mary, though, might give us a better window into poor children's education. At 8, she's still too young for full-time work, though she helps her mother with washing and minding the baby. 3 mornings a week she attends a ragged school, a charity-run institution for the poorest children. The ragged school is a single room above a stable, filled with 60 children of various ages. They sit on benches at rough wooden tables, the smallest children at the front, the older ones at the back. There's one teacher, Miss Perkins, a spinster in her 30s, who sees this work as Christian charity. The conditions would horrify modern educators. The room is cold in winter, stifling in summer. There are few books. The children share tattered readers and slates for writing. Many come to school hungry, dirty, and exhausted from helping with family work before and after school. Mary arrives just as Miss Perkins is ringing the bell to start the day. She's wearing her only dress, patched in several places but clean. Her mother insists on cleanliness, seeing it as a bulwark against complete degradation. "Good morning, children," Miss Perkins says over the shuffling and whispering of 60 restless pupils. "Good morning, Miss Perkins," they chorus in ragged unison. The school day begins with a Bible reading and prayers. Religious instruction is central to poor children's education, partly because many ragged schools are funded by church groups, but also because Victorian reformers believed moral improvement was more important for the poor than academic achievement. After prayers, the children are divided by ability rather than age. Mary joins a group learning basic reading. She's bright and eager to learn, but her attendance is irregular. When her mother needs help or there's paying work she can do, education takes second place to survival. Miss Perkins moves between groups, setting work for each before moving on. The older children often help teach the younger ones, using the monitorial system common in poor schools of the era. "Mary, can you read this passage for us?" Miss Perkins asks, pointing to a paragraph in the tattered reader they're sharing. Mary concentrates, sounding out the words carefully. "The good child obeys his parents and is kind to all." She beams with pride at having read the sentence without help. "Very good, Mary," Miss Perkins says with a smile. "Now, who can tell me what obeys means?" This is education reduced to its most basic elements: literacy, numeracy, religious instruction, and moral lessons about knowing one's place. There's no Latin, no higher mathematics, no literature beyond simple moral tales. The goal is not to elevate poor children out of their class, but to make them better, more moral members of it. Mary loves school despite its limitations. The hours spent learning are a respite from household chores and the grinding reality of poverty. She treasures the knowledge she gains, seeing it, rightly, as a possible path to something better. "Miss Perkins says I read better than anyone in my group," she tells her mother proudly when she returns home at midday. Her mother smiles tiredly as she wrings out washing in their single room. "That's wonderful, love. Perhaps you'll be a shop girl someday with reading like that." This is the height of educational ambition for most poor families. Not university or professions, but perhaps a slightly better class of work than their parents had. A shop girl instead of a washerwoman, a clerk instead of a factory worker. You know what's truly crazy to me about Victorian education? The absolute certainty they had about what different classes of people needed to learn. There was no concept that a poor child might have the same intellectual capacity or potential as a rich one. Education was designed to reinforce class boundaries, not overcome them. Wait, let me give you a specific example that really drives this home. In 1862, there was this education reform called the Revised Code that introduced what they called payment by results. Schools for poor children received government funding based on their students' performance in yearly examinations in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Sounds reasonable, right? But here's the kicker. The standards were incredibly basic. By age 11, children were only expected to read a short paragraph from a newspaper, write from dictation, and do simple arithmetic. That was considered sufficient education for working-class children. Meanwhile, wealthy children the same age were studying Latin, Greek, algebra, and classic literature. The system wasn't designed to identify talented poor children and help them advance. It was designed to give poor children just enough education to be useful workers while ensuring they didn't develop aspirations above their station. Back in your wealthy household, William's education continues with his mathematics tutor, Mr. Baxter. Unlike Mr. Crawford, who treats Latin as an intellectual exercise, Mr. Baxter tries to relate mathematics to practical concerns. Now, Master William, let us say you inherit an estate that yields $5,000 per annum, but carries mortgages requiring payments of $200 per annum. If you wish to maintain a London residence costing $800 per annum and support a family at $1,500 per annum, how much remains for investments and improvements? William calculates quickly. $1,500, sir. Correct. And if those investments yield 5% annually, how much additional income will you have after 1 year? 75, sir. Very good. You see, mathematics has practical applications for a gentleman managing his affairs. This is as close as William's education comes to vocational training, learning to manage the wealth he'll inherit. He won't be taught a trade or profession. That would be beneath his station. If he weren't the eldest son, who will inherit the bulk of the family fortune. He might be prepared for the church, the military, or perhaps the diplomatic service. Acceptable occupations for younger sons of good families. William's sister, Emma, receives a different education entirely. At 14, she studies with a governess rather than tutors. Her curriculum includes French, music, drawing, needlework, and enough history and literature to make her an entertaining conversationalist. The goal is to prepare her for marriage, not intellectual achievement. Miss Harrington, the governess, watches as Emma practices the piano in the drawing room. Your wrist position is still not quite right, Miss Emma. Remember, a lady's accomplishments reflect on her breeding. Emma adjusts her wrists, suppressing a sigh. She actually enjoys reading and has a quick mind, but her education is designed to make her decorative rather than knowledgeable. Deep learning in women is considered unfeminine and possibly dangerous. Medical authorities warn it might divert energy from the reproductive organs to the brain, rendering women infertile or prone to hysteria. "Will I need to play at Lady Hartington's dinner next week?" Emma asks, hoping the answer is no. She finds performing for company nerve-wracking. "Your mother thinks it would be appropriate for you to play one piece," Miss Harrington replies. "Lord James will be there, and he's known to appreciate music." Emma blushes slightly. At 14, she's already being subtly prepared for the marriage market, though her formal debut is still a few years away. Her education, her accomplishments, even her carefully supervised social interactions are all designed with one goal in mind: securing an advantageous match. Meanwhile, Mary's education at the ragged school continues with an arithmetic lesson. The children work on slates, practicing simple sums. The practical focus is evident. They learn to calculate wages, measure cloth, and make change. These are the mathematical skills needed for working-class life. "Please, miss," Mary raises her hand, "when will we learn proper writing? My brother says he could get better work if he could write letters." Miss Perkins looks sympathetic but realistic. "We'll begin copperplate next month for those who've mastered their sums, Mary. But remember, for most positions, reading is more important than writing." This is another stark difference in educational goals. Poor children are taught to read instructions, signs, and simple texts, skills needed for manual and service work. Writing is considered less essential, as most jobs available to them require following orders, not giving them. By early afternoon, Mary's school day ends. The ragged school operates on a half-day schedule, assuming poor children need the remaining hours to contribute to family survival. Mary returns home to help her mother finish the washing, her mind still working on the day's lessons. "Mama, Miss Perkins says I might get a scholarship to the charity school if I keep learning well," she says as she folds clean linens. Her mother looks up, conflicted. A charity school would mean more education, perhaps even until age 12 or 13, but it would also mean years without Mary's contribution to the family income. "We'll see, love," she says, not wanting to discourage her daughter's hopes, while remaining practical about their circumstances. "It would be a fine thing, but we need every penny with the baby coming." Mary nods, understanding the unspoken reality. Education is a luxury when survival is at stake. Back in Belgravia, William's educational day is winding down with his final tutor, Mr. Thompson, who teaches history and geography. Today's lesson focuses on the British Empire, that vast pink expanse covering nearly a quarter of the globe on the schoolroom map. "The Empire, Master William, is Britain's greatest achievement," Mr. Thompson explains, pointing to territories from Canada to Australia, India to Africa. "We bring civilization, Christianity, and commerce to primitive peoples. It is the burden of the British gentleman to govern these territories wisely." This is education as imperial indoctrination, preparing William for his place in a ruling class that governs not just Britain, but a significant portion of the world's population. There's no questioning of Britain's right to these territories, no examination of the exploitation that underlies the imperial project. William is being taught that rule is his birthright, both at home and abroad. After his lessons conclude, William has free time before dinner. He heads to the garden where Peters has set up his new cricket set, a birthday gift. Physical education through sports is considered essential for boys of his class, teaching teamwork, leadership, and the concept of fair play that underpins the gentleman's code of conduct. As William practices his bowling technique, his father returns from his club and pauses to watch. These moments of paternal attention are rare and precious in wealthy Victorian families, where fathers are often distant figures. "Good form, William," you say, briefly resting a hand on your son's shoulder. "Crawford tells me your Latin is improving." William stands a little straighter. "Yes, father, I've been practicing the declensions you showed me." "Excellent. Perhaps you'll be ready for Harrow next year then." This casual mention of boarding school sends a ripple of anxiety through William. At 13, boys of his class typically leave home for public schools like Eton, Harrow, or Rugby. These institutions are breeding grounds for the Empire's future leaders, places where boys learn not just academic subjects, but the unwritten codes of upper-class masculine behaviour. The curriculum at these schools remains heavily classical, with an emphasis on Latin, Greek, and mathematics. Conditions are often harsh by modern standards: cold dormitories, poor food, harsh discipline, and institutionalized bullying. But the social connections formed there will shape the rest of William's life. I'll work hard to be ready, father, William says, hiding his apprehension. You nod, satisfied, and continue into the house. You yourself attended Eton, as did your father and grandfather. It's simply what men of your class do. The possibility that William might not attend or might attend a different type of school never crosses your mind. This certainty about educational paths is common across all classes in Victorian England. Children are prepared for the lives they're expected to lead, with little thought given to individual talents or desires. The education system is designed to reproduce the existing social order, not challenge it. And yet, despite these rigid structures, there are always exceptions. Poor children who find paths to education beyond what their birth would predict, wealthy children who reject the futures laid out for them. These exceptions are rare but significant, proving that human potential can sometimes transcend even the most stratified social systems. As the day ends in both households, the children prepare for sleep with vastly different prospects ahead of them. William will likely go to university, inherit wealth, and take his place among Britain's ruling class. Mary might, with luck and determination, secure slightly better work than her mother, but her horizons are severely limited by both gender and class. Tom, returning exhausted from another day of chimney sweeping, has even fewer prospects. By the time he's too large to climb chimneys, his lungs will be damaged by soot, his body stunted by malnutrition and labour. Without education, his options will be limited to manual work, assuming he survives to adulthood at all. This is the educational landscape of Victorian England, a system designed not to create opportunity but to prepare each class for its predetermined role. The stark divisions we've seen in housing, food and work are reinforced and perpetuated through education, ensuring that the children of the rich remain rich while the children of the poor remain poor. Yet even within these constraints, the human spirit seeks knowledge and growth. Mary treasures her limited schooling, finding joy in learning despite its practical limitations. And while William might take his educational privileges for granted, the knowledge he gains has intrinsic value beyond its social function. In our next chapter, we'll explore how the different classes of Victorian England spent their leisure time, how they played, relaxed and entertained themselves when work and education were done. Even in their moments of joy and recreation, the divide between rich and poor remained vast, yet there were surprising overlaps and shared pleasures that crossed class boundaries. As you drift closer to sleep, consider how education has shaped your own life and opportunities. Most of us today have access to learning that even the wealthiest Victorians couldn't imagine. It's a privilege they would have understood well, even if the democratic distribution of that privilege would have shocked them. The weekend arrives in both our Victorian worlds, a concept that means very different things depending on your social class. For the wealthy, weekends are for leisure and social display. For the poor, they might bring a partial reprieve from labour, but rarely a complete one. Let's start with your Saturday as a wealthy Victorian gentleman. You wake later than usual, perhaps 8 a.m. instead of 7, and enjoy a leisurely breakfast with the morning papers. The Times for serious news, perhaps Punch for humour and social commentary. Your butler has ironed the newspapers to remove the ink that might soil your fingers, just one of countless invisible services performed for your comfort. "Will you be riding in the park this morning, sir?" Jenkins asks as he helps you dress in casual morning attire, which still involves a jacket, waistcoat and properly tied cravat. "Yes, I think so. Have Thompson ready the bay mare." Horseback riding in Hyde Park, particularly along the fashionable stretch known as Rotten Row, is a social ritual as much as exercise. Between the hours of 10 a.m. and 1 p.m, the park becomes a showcase for the wealthy and well-connected. Ladies and gentlemen display their horsemanship, their fine mounts and their fashionable riding attire, while exchanging greetings and gossip. Your bay mare is a beautiful animal worth more than a working man's annual salary. Her coat gleams from daily grooming by dedicated stable hands. Your riding boots alone cost more than Tom's family spends on food in a month. As you trot along the sandy path of Rotten Row, you exchange nods and brief conversations with acquaintances. It's a perfect spring day, the kind that makes even London seem fresh and full of possibility. Harrington, good to see you out. Lord Pembroke pulls his stallion alongside yours. Thought you might be recovering after the Hartingtons' dinner. Went rather late, didn't it? You smile. Not too bad. Left before the worst of it. Wise man, I saw Westmoreland carrying his daughter to the carriage at 3 a.m. Poor girl was dead on her feet. He gives you a meaningful look. Lady Elizabeth seemed quite taken with you, by the by. This is leisure serving its social purpose. Recreation combined with networking, courtship and status display. Even your choice of horse and how well you ride it contribute to your social capital. After your ride, you might visit your club for lunch, then perhaps attend a cricket match at Lord's, or go to the races if it's the season. Sporting events are important social occasions, opportunities to see and be seen while enjoying the competition. Gambling is a common feature of wealthy leisure, not the desperate wagering of the poor, but elegant, controlled risk-taking that demonstrates both your wealth and your sporting attitude toward it. You might bet substantial sums on horses or cricket matches, or play cards for high stakes at your club. Losing gracefully without visible concern over the amounts marks you as a true gentleman. Let's shift across town to see how Tom and his family spend their Saturday. For Tom, Saturday means a half day of work rather than the usual 14 hours. He still rises before dawn to sweep chimneys, but finishes around 2 p.m. This half day is a Victorian reform intended to provide working people with some leisure time, though many employers find ways around it. Tom returns home with his meagre pay, perhaps 5 shillings for the week, most of which goes directly to his mother for food and rent. But he's kept back a penny, a rare extravagance for Saturday's entertainment. "Can I go to the Penny Gaff with Eddie?" he asks his mother, referring to a cheap neighbourhood theatre that offers variety shows. His mother hesitates. Penny gaffs have dubious reputations. They're often rowdy and sometimes feature content that's hardly appropriate for children. But Tom works hard all week and childhood pleasures are few in his world. "Just an hour, mind," she says finally, and straight back after. Tom grins and dashes out to find his friend, another sweet boy who lives 3 doors down. Together they head for the Penny Gaff, a converted shop where wooden benches face a small raised stage. For their penny admission, they'll see a mixed programme of songs, dances, comic sketches, and perhaps a melodrama with exaggerated villains and heroes. The audience is primarily working class, factory workers, servants on their half-day off, street vendors and labourers. The atmosphere is raucous, with audience members calling out to performers, singing along with familiar songs and freely expressing approval or disapproval. "Look! They've got Funny Joe tonight." Eddie points excitedly to a crude poster advertising a popular comedian. "My brother says he does this bit with a live pig that'll make you wet yourself laughing." The boys find seats on a bench near the back, their small size making it hard to see over the adults in front. The air is thick with tobacco smoke, beer fumes, and the smell of unwashed bodies. Not that Tom notices, being perpetually covered in chimney soot himself. The show begins with a singer, a woman in tawdry finery performing music hall ballads with suggestive lyrics that go over Tom's head but elicit knowing laughter from the adults. Then comes a man who juggles knives, a girl who dances on a ball, and finally Funny Joe himself with his trained pig. The performance is crude by upper-class standards, but it provides genuine belly laughs and a few moments of wonder for Tom. This is entertainment that speaks directly to working-class experiences and humour without the pretensions or moral instructiveness of improving entertainment offered by middle-class reformers. When the show ends, Tom and Eddie spill out onto the street with the rest of the audience, still laughing about Funny Joe's antics. "Core, that was worth a penny and then some," Eddie declares. "What'll you do with the rest of your half day then?" Tom shrugs. "Help Mum with the washing, probably." "You?" "Dad's taking us to the dog fights behind the Bull and Crown. Wanna come?" Tom shakes his head. "Can't. Promised Mum I'd be right back." Animal sports, dog fights, rat baiting, cockfighting are popular working-class entertainments despite being technically illegal. They offer excitement, social gathering, and the opportunity to gamble small sums that might multiply into meaningful amounts. But Tom's mother disapproves, believing such spectacles brutalise those who watch them. Instead, Tom returns home to help with household chores. Leisure for poor children is often limited and interspersed with work. Even play frequently mimics adult labour. Girls play at keeping house, boys at trades they might enter. Still, there are moments of genuine childhood joy. After helping with the washing, Tom joins a group of neighbourhood children in a street game of King of the Castle, using a pile of construction rubble as their fortress. The game is physical, competitive, and offers a rare opportunity for mastery and control in lives largely defined by submission to adult authority. Now let's return to your evening as a wealthy Victorian. Saturday night might mean a dinner party, a ball, or perhaps the theatre or opera. Tonight, you and your wife are attending a performance at the Royal Opera House, followed by a late supper at Lady Pembroke's. Your evening clothes are even more formal than your day wear. A black tailcoat with satin lapels, white waistcoat, white bow tie, and black trousers with a satin stripe down each leg. Your wife wears an evening gown with a low neckline, her hair elaborately arranged with jewelled pins, long gloves extending above her elbows. Your private carriage delivers you to the opera house, where you're shown to your box. These boxes, rented by subscription for the season, are as much about seeing and being seen as about watching the performance. Opera glasses are used as often to observe other audience members as to view the stage. "The Westmorlands are here," your wife murmurs, subtly indicating a box across the theatre where Lady Elizabeth sits with her parents. "And there's Lord James with them." You lift your opera glasses for a discreet look. Lady Elizabeth is indeed present, looking quite fetching in pale blue. Lord James sits beside her, handsome and tanned from his time in India. You feel a slight twinge, not jealousy exactly, but awareness that marital arrangements can change quickly in your social circle. The performance is Verdi's La Traviata, sung in Italian. You understand enough to follow along, having received the classical education we discussed earlier. Your wife, educated by governesses rather than tutors, relies more on the printed programme and her general familiarity with the story. During the intermission, you promenade in the grand foyer, exchanging greetings with acquaintances. This is another form of social work disguised as leisure, maintaining connections, gathering information, assessing the subtle shifts in status and alliance that define high society. Harrington, Lord Westmoreland approaches, his daughter and nephew in tow. Enjoying the performance? Indeed, though I think their last Verdi was stronger. Quite. You know my daughter, Lady Elizabeth, of course, and my nephew, Lord James. You bow over Lady Elizabeth's hand. "A pleasure to see you again, Lady Elizabeth." She curtsies, eyes downcast in proper maiden modesty. Lord Harrington. Lord James shakes your hand with colonial informality. "Harrington, good to see you. Your wife looks radiant tonight." There's a subtle dance happening here. Lord Westmoreland displaying his daughter like fine merchandise. Lord James assessing you as potential competition. Your wife and Lady Elizabeth maintaining proper feminine decorum while communicating volumes through glances and slight gestures. This is leisure as performance, as social negotiation, as business. The actual opera is almost secondary to these complex interactions. After the performance and a late supper at Lady Pembroke's, another opportunity for social display and connection, you and your wife return home well after midnight. Your servants, of course, have waited up regardless of their own fatigue. They help you and your wife undress, prepare you for sleep, and only then seek their own rest. Tom's Saturday evening is considerably different. After his street games, he returns home for a simple supper, perhaps bread and dripping again, or potato soup if they're fortunate. Then the family gathers around their small fire as Tom's father returns from his day's labour as a bricklayer. Despite their poverty, this is a moment of genuine family togetherness. Tom's father, usually taciturn from exhaustion, tells stories about his own childhood in rural Yorkshire. His mother darns socks by the light of their single candle. Mary practices her reading aloud from a tattered story paper borrowed from a neighbour. The Curse of the Pharaoh, Chapter 3, she reads carefully. Lord Blackwood entered the ancient tomb, his torch casting eerie shadows on the hieroglyphic-covered walls. These penny dreadfuls and story papers are the working-class equivalent of novels. Cheap, sensational, and often gothic or melodramatic. They offer escape and excitement in lives defined by routine and hardship. Tom listens, enthralled as Mary reads about cursed mummies and brave explorers. These stories offer windows into worlds he'll never see, experiences he'll never have. They're pure fantasy, but they expand his imagination beyond the narrow confines of Seven Dials. After the story, perhaps there's music. Tom's father plays a tin whistle, a skill learned in his youth. The tunes are folk songs passed down through generations, played from memory rather than sheet music. The children might sing along or even dance in the small space, creating joy despite their circumstances. By 9 o'clock, the family is preparing for sleep. The single room serves as bedroom for all of them, with privacy a foreign concept. They sleep close for warmth and comfort, the children often piled together on pallets on the floor. This scene, the working-class family gathered around their fire for simple entertainment, became a powerful image in Victorian culture. Middle and upper-class observers often romanticised such moments, seeing in them a pure, uncomplicated happiness supposedly lost to the wealthy in their pursuit of sophisticated pleasures. The reality, of course, was more complex. Yes, there was genuine joy and connection in these family gatherings, but they existed alongside constant anxiety about money, health, and survival. The simplicity was born of necessity, not choice. Sunday brings different leisure patterns for both classes. For you and your wealthy family, Sunday means church attendance, not just religious observance, but another opportunity for social display. Your family pew, often boxed and sometimes with its own entrance, demonstrates your status in the parish. Your donations support the church and provide moral justification for your privilege. After church comes Sunday dinner, the most formal meal of the week, often with extended family or close friends invited. The afternoon might bring sedate activities considered appropriate for the Sabbath, reading improving literature, taking a decorous walk, perhaps sacred music. Games, sports, and frivolous entertainments are discouraged, at least in households that maintain proper Victorian piety. For Tom's family, Sunday also centres on church, though their experience differs greatly from yours. They attend a working-class chapel rather than your elegant parish church. The service is longer, the sermon more focused on sin and redemption than on general moral improvement. There are no family pews, seating is on backless benches with the most desirable spots near the front, often claimed by regular donors of even small amounts. After chapel, Tom's family might splurge on their best meal of the week, perhaps even a small piece of meat, a luxury reserved for Sundays. The afternoon might bring a walk in a public park if weather permits, or visits with neighbours and relatives. Despite official discouragement of Sunday recreation, working-class neighbourhoods often buzz with activity on the one day most people have free. One thing about Victorian leisure that always fascinates me is how class-segregated it was, and yet how certain forms of entertainment crossed class lines. The music hall, for instance, began as working-class entertainment, but eventually attracted middle and even upper-class audiences, though they sat in different sections and attended different venues. Similarly, certain sporting events, particularly horse racing, drew spectators from all classes, though they experienced the events very differently. The wealthy watched from private boxes or members' enclosures, the working class from the cheaper, more crowded general areas. I'm also struck by how communal most Victorian leisure was compared to our often solitary entertainments today. Whether rich or poor, Victorians sought amusement together in theatres, parks, churches and homes. Few had the private space or resources for entirely solitary pursuits. Even reading, perhaps the most solitary-seeming activity, often happened in shared spaces and sometimes aloud. Families gathered to hear one member read from a book or newspaper. Public readings by authors like Charles Dickens drew huge crowds from various social classes. The idea of everyone in a household retreating to separate rooms with individual entertainment devices would have seemed bizarre and possibly disturbing to Victorians of any class. As Sunday evening falls on both households, they prepare for the week ahead. Your servants lay out your business attire for Monday, while your wife reviews her social calendar. The machinery of wealthy Victorian life requires constant attention and management, even during ostensible leisure time. In 7 Dials, Tom and his family also prepare for another week of labour. Clothes are laid out, simple meals planned, pennies counted to ensure they'll stretch until the next payday. Their leisure has been brief but real, moments of joy and connection snatched from lives otherwise defined by work and worry. The contrast in leisure between rich and poor in Victorian England wasn't just about different activities or settings, it was about fundamentally different relationships to time, space and social expectation. The wealthy had leisure as an expectation, the poor as an exception. The wealthy used leisure to reinforce social bonds and status, the poor to escape, however briefly, from the grinding realities of their existence. Yet in both worlds, people sought the same basic elements in their free time: pleasure, connection, escape, and meaning. The forms differed dramatically, but the underlying human needs remained constant across the vast social divide. In our next chapter, we'll explore perhaps the starkest contrast between rich and poor Victorian lives: health, illness, and medical care, how disease affected different classes, how they sought healing, and how dramatically your chances of survival depended on your social position. It's a sobering but fascinating window into Victorian life and death, where your address often determined whether you lived or died from the same condition. The morning fog hangs heavy over London, seeping through cracks in windows and under doors. It's not just any fog, it's the infamous pea super, a toxic mixture of coal smoke and natural mist that turns the air into something you can almost chew. In both our households, yours in Belgravia and Tom's in 7 Dials, someone is coughing. Illness was perhaps the greatest equalizer in Victorian England. Disease could strike anyone, rich or poor, but what happened after you fell ill? That's where the equality ended, and the stark divisions of Victorian society became matters of life and death. In your elegant Belgravia townhouse, it's your youngest child, 4-year-old Charlotte, who wakes with a rattling cough and flushed cheeks. Her nurse notices immediately. She sleeps in an adjoining room specifically to monitor the child through the night. "Miss Charlotte seems feverish, my lady," the nurse reports to your... For 40 years, Frank Glazer lived a life that would kill most men in days. He crossed freezing rivers alone, out-tracked native hunters, shot wolves for the government but respected them more than most humans, and called a dirt-floored cabin home for 13 brutal winters. He walked the line between hunter and naturalist, killer and caretaker, myth and man. Here's what life was really like for Alaska's most fearless mountain man you've never heard of. Before we start, if these stories help you sleep, hit subscribe so you don't miss any. Comment where you're at and the time too. Kind of fun seeing all the different places. Someone from Iceland commented once and I had to Google what time zone that even is. Okay, tonight we're heading to Alaska in 1915, but before we go anywhere, get cozy. Like, actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. You wake up to pitch darkness, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. Your breath clouds in front of your face, visible even in the dim light. It's so cold your nose hairs have frozen, not like the gentle chill that has you reaching for an extra blanket. We're talking about the kind of cold that kills. This is Alaska, 1915, and right now, you're Frank Glazer. 26 years old, single, done with normal life. A few hours ago, you walked out of Washington State with 2 duffels, a .306 Winchester rifle, binoculars, and what the locals might call a hunger for chaos. You've just stepped off the SS Mariposa onto Alaskan soil, and what greets you isn't a welcome committee. It's 25 feet of snow in Thompson Pass. You'll never make it, someone tells you. 3 men died trying to reach Fairbanks last month. You just adjust your pack straps and keep walking. See, the thing about Frank Glazer that made him different, he wasn't running to something. He wasn't chasing gold or glory like everyone else flooding into Alaska back then. He was just done. Done with whatever passed for civilization back in Washington. Done with people, probably. I came to Alaska looking for game, he'd say years later. What I found was something wilder. What he found was a 371-mile death march to Fairbanks. I'm serious. That's what it was. No roads, no trains, just a crude trail through what locals described as part sludge pit, part ice trap, part murder alley, and Frank walked right into it without blinking. The locals in Valdez didn't sugarcoat it. Too much snow in the pass, they warned, and rivers got no bridges. 2 men got killed in Copper Center last fall. You know what most people would do hearing that? Turn around, get back on the boat, tell everyone back home, yeah, I tried Alaska, wasn't for me, not Frank. Instead, he finds an old sourdough. That's what they called the experienced pioneers, the ones who'd survived at least one winter, and convinces the guy to be his trail partner. Frank shoves his supplies into a rucksack and they hit the trail. The rest of the newcomers, the soft city chichacos as the locals called them, were hauling way too much gear and wearing what might as well have been dress shoes. Once they hit waist-deep snow, they broke. Feet sore, packs soaked, spirits crushed. Picture this, you're knee-deep in snow that sometimes goes up to your waist, your boots are soaked through, your toes are numb, then painful, then numb again, which is worse because that's when frostbite sets in. One guy named Knockout Solomon, and I'm not making that up, was cursing non-stop because his fancy high-end boots basically chewed his feet into raw meat. Should have gone with moose hide, the sourdough probably told him. Too late now, but Frank just kept walking. I've been outdoors, I've hiked, I've camped, but this was a different universe of hardship. The nights were brutal. The snow would crust just enough to make you think it was solid, then cave in without warning. You'd plunge waist deep, have to claw your way out, then take 2 more steps and repeat the whole process. You'll never make it unless it crusts again tonight, the owner of Ptarmigan Drop Roadhouse told them. Frank didn't wait. Waiting meant frostbite or worse. The thing about Alaska that I don't think we can even comprehend today is the rivers. Today we've got bridges, right? Highways, GPS. Back then, you'd hit a river and there'd be nothing. No bridge, no boat, just an icy torrent cutting through your path. So what do? Well, if you're Frank Glazer in 1915, the answer is simple and also completely insane. You strip naked. Yeah. In temperatures that could freeze spit before it hits the ground, you take off your clothes, you bundle them up with your gear to keep them dry, then you wade through a river so cold it feels like your skin is being sliced open with every step. One time, Frank actually soaked his bleeding feet in the freezing water, then dried them, pulled on fresh socks, and kept moving. That toughened me up, he said later, like it was nothing, like stepping into ice water with open wounds was just a normal Tuesday. I'd have quit right there, would have been like, you know what, Washington State wasn't so bad. The roadhouses came every 20 miles or so. Some were open, some were boarded up tight. At Upper Tonsina, Frank got a bed and immediately regretted it. His trail partner took one look at him the next day and said, "You're lousy, Glazer. Should have checked the bed." Lousy as in covered in lice. After that, Frank chose stars over sheets. Decided he'd rather freeze than itch. That sourdough partner eventually peeled off to work a mine, and so Frank went solo, that's right, alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, without GPS or cell phones or Gore-Tex or any of the high-tech gear we'd consider essential today. He slept by day and hiked by night, constantly scanning for game, for shelter, for anything that seemed off. He'd developed this sixth sense already, something that would define him for the next 4 decades, an awareness of everything around him, a way of reading the wild like it was sending him signals no one else could hear. At Copper Center, he developed what locals called musher's knee, this deep, grinding ache from dragging 60 pounds through mud and snow. The local fix? Stand in an icy stream until your legs go numb, dry off, keep going. I mean, the medical care back then was basically just various forms of torture that sometimes accidentally helped. And this remedy, it sounds insane, but it actually worked. The cold reduced inflammation, numbed the pain. People who live in extreme environments develop extreme solutions. You know what's interesting about that trail? A historian once told me? It didn't just test your body, it messed with your head. Copper Center had stories that would follow Frank. There, the McRaes bred silver and black foxes worth a fortune. Frank learned quick that if you mess with a nesting vixen, she'll kill her own pups rather than let them be taken. He also heard about a triple murder from the previous fall. One guy's arm turned up in a sled dog's mouth, another had 7.22 bullets in his back. Picture yourself there. You're alone in the wilderness, it's getting dark, and you've just heard about dismembered bodies being found in this exact area. Plus, now the snow is turning to bog, which means mosquitoes. Not the annoying kind we deal with in summer. We're talking swarms so thick they could block out the sun. They hit like they'd been starving for weeks. Frank picked up a bed net at a trading post. Might have been the smartest thing he ever bought, an old-timer told me. In Galkana, he passed a signal corps shack where a lynx lounged on the desk and rode stray dogs like ponies. Tame Dal sheep climbed haylofts, foxes twitched in wire cages, marten farms bloomed in the mud. It's like the wild and civilization blurred into one weird mess. That's Alaska for you. Places where the rules we take for granted just don't apply. Then came sourdough, not a person, a roadhouse, and not just any roadhouse. This one was run by swearing Molly, 6'2", sharp-tongued, didn't take crap from anyone. She cursed like a dock worker and cooked like a chef. When Frank showed up, she was mid-rant, chasing some poor guy out with a storm of insults. Then she looked at Frank like nothing had happened and said, "You hungry? Come in, have some coffee." Her place was spotless. Carpeted floors, curtained windows, warm fire. It was a magnet for traders, trappers, drifters, anyone with a story or scars. Molly ran the joint like a queen. Once she got sweet on a driver named Jack Bishop. He mailed her a fake gold nugget made of salt. She showed it off all summer, thought she'd struck it rich. When the truth came out, she vowed revenge, then forgave him by spring. That was Molly, fire and grace wrapped up in boots. When Frank left, the ground got worse. Spruce log roads turned to deep, sucking mud. The trail climbed again past Paxton Lake, past Summit Lake, both frozen solid in May. Somewhere along the ice, Frank met Bobby Sheldon, the first guy to drive from Fairbanks to Valdez. He was hacking at ice, trying to drag a busted Model T across it. Frank jumped in, swinging tools for hours. Bobby was a real pioneer, Frank would say later, almost with admiration, which wasn't something he gave out easily. A miner named Matt McGovern, 52, joined Frank for a stretch. Decent guy until he almost shot Frank while fiddling with a pistol. Then McGovern remembered he'd left $400 in a vest back at Paxton's, about $11,000 in today's money. The guy turned around, ran all the way back and came grinning with the cash like it was no big deal. These people weren't normal, none of them, including Frank. They timed river crossings for noon before meltwater swelled from the day's sun. Midnight hits and those rivers will kill you, Frank said. One wrong step and you're gone. He saw it happen later. Sheldon lost a whole Model T to a river and spent weeks pretending to pan gold out of the wreck. I guess when you lose everything, you either break down or make jokes. At Yost's Roadhouse, things turned gloomy. 12 people had frozen to death there one winter. Blizzards blinded travellers just yards from the door. The army had put up a fence and a bell that clanged in the wind, hoping it might save the next poor soul who got caught out there. Frank also heard about stagecoach passengers dumped in a whiteout, crawling blind in the snow while a signal corps sergeant dragged them in one at a time. And past Yost's, the wild bit back. Grizzly tracks the size of snowshoes crossed the trail. Frank always kept his rifle loaded and close. Snowshoe hares bolted like sparks, tearing bark off willows like locusts. The rhythm out there was simple. Eat, freeze, survive, repeat. By the time Frank limped into Fairbanks, he was wrecked. Scarred from lice, feet shredded, eyes hollow. He'd walked nearly 400 miles through some of the nastiest terrain on the continent. Broke, beat up, tough as rawhide, but he'd made it. He was home, nobody there to greet him. No parade, no handshake, no welcome to Fairbanks banner. Just a raw frontier town full of people either chasing fortune or running from something. Frank wasn't doing either. He was just looking for a place where he could be alone with the wild, a place that would test him every day, a place where survival wasn't taken for granted. He found it, and in doing so, he found himself. You lie in your bed. Unlike Frank, who slept on frozen ground or in lousy roadhouses, you pull your blanket tighter, grateful for walls that keep out the wind, for running water that isn't a freezing river you have to cross naked, for the simple luxury of being warm, of being safe. And as you drift, you wonder, what would make a man choose that life? What was Frank Glazer running from? Or maybe, what was he running toward? This was just the beginning. Frank Glazer's Alaskan adventure had only just begun, and the wild was waiting to test him in ways he couldn't imagine. The wolves hadn't even entered his story yet, but they would, soon enough. Frank Glazer didn't hunt for sport. He hunted to eat, to survive, to make $1. In Alaska, meat was currency, and currency meant staying alive. Frank limped into Fairbanks with feet torn to shreds, his body battered from the journey, but his eyes, they were scanning the horizon already. He saw nothing but wild country stretched in every direction and went straight to work. From 1915 to 1924, Frank was what they called a market hunter. In those days, before supermarkets and refrigerated trucks, the people in frontier towns like Fairbanks needed meat. Miners, traders, roadhouse operators, they all had money, but they didn't have the time or skills to hunt. That's where men like Frank came in. He scouted the Alaska range, picked his grounds, and got busy. The rhythm was simple: shoot, butcher, haul, sell, repeat. You're probably thinking, wait, he just walked 371 miles through hell and now he's going hunting? Yeah, that's exactly what he did. No rest, no recovery time. The wilderness doesn't give you a break just because you're tired. Frank moved through the slopes near the Valdez Trail like a shadow. Caribou, Dall sheep, moose. He tracked them through silence, through storms, knew their patterns like a map burned into his head. He carried that .306 Winchester like it was part of his arm. When Frank raised that rifle, one guy said years later, something dropped every time. He packed light when he hunted. Just the rifle, some ammunition, basic supplies. He'd disappear into the backcountry for days at a time. No radio, no backup, just Frank and whatever animal he was tracking. When he returned to civilization, he hauled hundreds of pounds of meat, sometimes dragging it through snow on a makeshift sled, sometimes packing it over ridgeline trails on his back. He sold it for 25 cents a pound. That's about $7 in today's money. There was no show to it, no ego, just blood, cold, and the math of survival. "How do you know where to find that moose?" someone once asked him. Frank just shrugged. "You listen to what the land's telling you." One time he dropped a moose cow deep in the woods, miles from anywhere. Most hunters would have taken the choice cuts and left the rest. Not Frank. He hauled the meat out solo, load by load, over 3 days, slept under spruce boughs when skies were clear, huddled by warm rocks when they weren't. No partner, no backup. "I got used to it," he said later. "Didn't need anybody. I had the animals." Game was thick in Alaska back then, and surprisingly fearless. Animals hadn't learned to fear humans yet. There just weren't enough people around. He once spotted Dall sheep across a canyon. They didn't see him. He belly crawled a mile through frozen brush, picked one, dropped it, then skinned it in the snow and packed it home. For Frank, there was no thrill in the kill, just meat, money, and calculating how long it would last. You have to understand, market hunting wasn't a job, it was survival. There were no roads, no shortcuts, just rough trails, steep climbs, deep creeks, 1 minute sun, next minute blizzard. The weather turns on you up there, an old-timer told me once. No warning, blue sky can go white in 10 minutes, then you're in trouble. Once a storm pinned Frank down for 3 days. He crawled under spruce boughs, a moose carcass just yards away. The wind howled like a banshee. That's not just a saying, that's actually what it sounds like when wind cuts through black spruce at 40 below. Frank curled up in his sleeping bag and hoped the bears didn't smell the meat. "Too cold to worry," he said later. "Too cold to move." Food ran thin often. He shot ptarmigan when he could find them, those Arctic grouse that turn white in winter. When game was scarce, he boiled bones and scraps, dug roots, picked bulbs, ate whatever the land offered. "I didn't waste nothing," he said. "If I killed it, I used it." Unlike trophy hunters, Frank didn't care about antlers unless they meant extra cash. "I never shot cows if I could help it," he said. "Same with ewes. Took bulls, took rams, left the breeders." He didn't do this out of some ethical stance or conservation mindset. It was pure logic. If you kill the breeding females, there won't be any game next year. And if there's no game, you starve. Frank hunted where the ground tried to kill you. Loose rock, ice-covered logs, steep slopes, places where a twisted ankle meant death. Rivers like the Delta and Little Tock weren't just cold, they were deadly. In spring, they rose fast, fed by snowmelt. One crossing, he lost half a moose when his pack slipped. Meat gone. "Damn shame," he said. "That was good meat." His rifle was part of him. Even in his 60s, he wore no glasses. He could spot fur on a ridge at distances that made other hunters squint. The gun was always loaded, always within reach, not just for hunting, for protection. If you've never been in bear country, you can't understand what it means to be prey. In most of our modern lives, we're at the top of the food chain. We don't think about being eaten, but in Alaska, especially back then, you were just another animal. And often you weren't the biggest or the strongest. The winters were dead quiet. Snow muffled every sound. Wind whispered through trees. Frank went weeks without hearing a human voice. "I never got lonesome," he told a writer named Jim Reardon years later. "I had my rifle, I had work to do." He packed meat to roadhouses and camps, anywhere that paid. $1/4 a pound mattered when you had nothing. "I could pack 100 pounds easy," Frank said. Did it all the time. His journal entries from those years don't ramble, just facts, clipped and direct. Shot 2 moose, packed 1 down, too much snow for dogs, slept rough, snowed all night. Another entry, wind bad, nearly lost sled, killed 1 caribou, feet froze. There was no room for mistakes. Twist a knee, you're stuck. No food, you starve. Break an ankle, you die. But Frank didn't slow down. He kept moving, tracking, hauling, hustling meat through deep snow and dead silence just to earn a buck. No rangers, no safety net, just you, your rifle, and whatever you could carry out. You're lying in your warm bed right now, maybe sipping something hot, comfortable, safe. Frank went years without any of that. Years where each day was a fight to survive, where comfort was a luxury he couldn't afford. You know what really stands out about Frank during these years? He was alone, completely alone, but he wasn't running from people. He wasn't some misanthrope who hated humanity. He just preferred the quiet, the simplicity of survival, the honest transaction between him and the wild. "People complicate things," he said once. "Animals are straight with you. They're trying to live, same as you. No lies, no games." The hunting was hard physical labour, but it suited him. Up before dawn most days, moving through forest and tundra in silence, reading tracks, watching wind direction, checking snow conditions. Frank spoke the wild's language, moved through it like he belonged. "Game's smarter than you think," he said once. "You got to outthink it, outwalk it, outfreeze it if that's what it takes." The Alaska Range, where Frank did most of his hunting, is brutal country. Peaks jutting up to 13,000 feet, valleys so deep they don't see sun for months in winter, glaciers that can swallow you whole if you step wrong. Frank knew every ridge, every pass. He learned the terrain inch by inch, paid for that knowledge with frozen fingers and hungry nights. He had a map in his head, said Oscar Vogel, who knew him later, more detailed than anything on paper. Most market hunters worked in pairs at least, sharing the load, watching each other's backs. Frank preferred going solo, less talk, more focus. No one to slow him down or second-guess his decisions, and his decisions were absolute. If he decided to cross a pass in a storm, that's what he did. If he chose to track a bull moose for 3 days, he stayed with it until the job was done. One winter, temperatures dropped to 60 below for 2 weeks straight. Most hunters stayed in, waited it out. Frank kept working. He'd build small fires, just enough to keep his hands functioning, then move on, keep the blood flowing, stay alive. Cold will kill you, a trapper told me once, but so will sitting still. It's a balance. Frank found that balance. He respected the cold, prepared for it, but never surrendered to it. There was one close call in 1920. Frank was tracking a caribou herd near the Tok River when a storm blew in from nowhere. Visibility dropped to 0, wind howling, snow blasting sideways. He lost the trail, lost his bearings. For 3 hours he wandered, growing colder by the minute. Most people would have panicked. Frank just kept moving, working in a grid pattern until he found a familiar landmark, a lightning-struck spruce he recognized even in the whiteout. From there, he navigated to a line shack he knew was nearby, spent 3 days there, waiting out the storm. "Wasn't worried," he said later, "just inconvenienced." The man's capacity for understatement was legendary. By 1924, Frank had established himself as one of the most reliable meat hunters in interior Alaska. Store owners would pay premium prices for his game because they knew it would be properly dressed, properly handled. Frank's meat never spoiled, one shopkeeper said. Man knew how to treat an animal from kill to kitchen. But something was changing in Frank. Years alone in the wild, watching animals, tracking them, killing them, it changes a person. You start to see patterns, start to understand the balance of things. Frank was noticing wolves more and more, seeing how they hunted, how they moved, how they lived. They fascinated him, not as targets, as teachers. The wolves of Alaska were different from those in the lower 48. Bigger, for one thing. 130 pounds wasn't uncommon. Smart, too. They hunted in coordinated packs, taking down moose 10 times their size. Frank watched them whenever he could, made notes, observed their habits. He wasn't studying them scientifically. He was learning from them, the way they chose their prey, the way they moved through snow, the way they conserved energy. Wolves don't waste effort, he told a biologist years later. They don't show off. They do what needs doing, then rest. People could learn from that. Most hunters hated wolves, saw them as competition, as vermin to be eliminated. Frank saw them differently, with respect, maybe even admiration. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't sentimental about them. He still hunted, still killed for meat and money, but he recognized something in those wolves. A kindred spirit, maybe. Another survivor in a land that killed the careless. Winter in Alaska isn't just cold, it's dark. Near the Arctic Circle, the sun barely rises in December and January. Just a few hours of twilight, then darkness again. It messes with your head all that night. Frank adapted, started using the darkness like wolves do, hunting at dusk and dawn when prey is moving, but visibility still works in your favour. He became nocturnal when needed, diurnal when that made more sense. You don't fight the land, he said. You don't fight the weather or the light. You work with what's given. By the end of 1924, Frank was looking for something different. The market hunting was steady work, but it wasn't challenging him anymore. He wanted something more permanent, something he could build. He'd been eyeing a spot along the Savage River, deep in what's now Denali National Park. Remote, wild, game-rich, perfect. That fall, he made his decision. He'd build a cabin there, stake his claim, make it home. I wanted a place, he said simply, just a place that was mine. For nearly a decade, Frank had lived like a ghost, passing through the Alaska wilderness, leaving almost no trace. Now he was ready to put down roots, just not anywhere near other people. The Savage River would be his home for the next 13 years, and there in that isolated valley the legend of the Wolfman would truly begin. That's where we'll pick up next. Frank building his cabin on the Savage River, a home so remote that months would pass without him seeing another human face, a place where wolves would become his closest neighbours, his subjects of study, and eventually his prey. But that night, as he prepared for this new chapter, Frank Glazer slept under stars so bright and cold they seemed to burn. The northern lights danced green and purple across the black sky. The temperature dropped to 30 below. And Frank, wrapped in his sleeping bag beside a small fire, was exactly where he wanted to be. You pull your blanket a little tighter, thinking about that kind of cold, the kind that burns your lungs when you breathe, the kind that turns your breath to ice crystals that fall tinkling to the ground. You're warm, comfortable, safe. Frank Glazer chose to live without any of that comfort in exchange for something most of us will never understand. Absolute freedom, absolute solitude, absolute independence. Was it worth it? For Frank, there was never any question. The wild had claimed him. He belonged to Alaska now. Frank Glazer built his Savage River cabin in 10 days flat. No crew, no plans, no power tools, just an axe, muscle, and a brain made for solving problems in the middle of nowhere. Picture yourself in his boots for a second. It's 1924. There's no Home Depot, no YouTube tutorials, no one to call if things go wrong. Just you, standing in a clearing, surrounded by spruce trees and silence, thinking, all right, I need a place that will keep me alive through winter. And winter in Alaska isn't your average winter. It's not grab another sweater cold. It's your spit freezes before it hits the ground cold. It's make one mistake and they'll find your body in spring cold. The cabin Frank built wasn't pretty. Sod roof, dirt floor, logs sealed with mud, ugly as sin but warm, and it was his. Every inch of it came from his own hands. The location was deliberate, deep in the Alaska range. No roads, no people, just how he liked it. By 1924, Frank was done with towns, done with anything resembling civilization. Savage River gave him space, game, and peace. He stayed 13 years. Most people can't stay in one apartment for 13 months without getting restless. I needed a place where I could hear myself think, he told a visitor years later. Fairbanks was getting too crowded. Fairbanks at the time had maybe 2,000 people. The winters there could freeze your lungs when you breathed too deeply, but Frank didn't care. He thrived in conditions that would kill most people in hours. No neighbours, no noise, just wind and wolves. Those wolves, their howls echoed through the valleys at night. When most people heard that sound, they reached for a rifle. When Frank heard it, he listened, really listened, started to learn the different tones, the various messages. Wolves talk to each other, he said once. Not like people talk, better, no lies in it. The cabin became his headquarters. From there, he trapped, hunted, and sometimes hiked blind through blizzards. No compass, just instinct. I always knew where I was, he said years later. Could read the country like a book. His journal from those years was all business. Snowed all night. Cut firewood. Wolf tracks near trapline. But between those clipped lines, life was incredibly rough. When food ran low, he boiled spruce bark for tea. He skinned frozen kills by lantern light, his fingers blue with cold. He dried soaked boots by the stove, knowing that wet feet meant death when temperatures hit 50 below. He always kept his rifle loaded and within reach, not for wolves, but for grizzlies. Spring brought them in close, hungry after hibernation, ready to claim whatever food they could find. One journal entry read simply, "Had a hell of a time crossing river." That's all he wrote. But years later, he told the full story. Swept into an ice-choked current, rifle under one arm, pack-soaked, boots dragging like anchors. He clawed his way to shore, half-frozen but alive. In his journal. Just those 8 words. The man didn't waste breath, even on paper. Here's where Frank's story takes a turn that makes him different from other mountain men, other trappers. He didn't just live near wolves, he raised them. Each spring he'd find dens, snatch a few pups and bring them home. He raised them alongside his sled dogs. The result? A team of half-wild, all-muscle hybrids he called wolf dogs. They'd fight like devils, he said, but run like hell when you hooked them up. He fed them caribou scraps, watched how they moved, named them King, Queenie. They weren't pets. Frank didn't do pets. They were workers, partners, a piece of the wild, leashed but never truly tamed. You know how some people get really into their hobbies, like they start making sourdough bread, and suddenly their Instagram is nothing but loaf pictures. Frank got like that with wolves, but there was no Instagram. Just him, alone in his cabin, turning into an amateur scientist. Inside the cabin, Frank became a field biologist without even realizing it. He tracked prints in the snow, studied scat, took detailed notes, sketched wolf movements in the margins of his journal. The walls of his cabin gradually filled with observations, notes on pack structure, hunting patterns, communication, not because anyone asked him to, not for money or fame, just because the wolves fascinated him. By the mid-1930s, Frank dug deeper into wolf study. Alone in his Savage River cabin, something changed. The hunter became a student. He observed how wolves hunted, how they took down the weak, old, or slow prey. People say they kill for fun, he wrote in a note to himself. Not true. They kill to live, and they're better at it than most men. They used their heads, he noticed. Didn't rush, waited, worked together, set up ambushes, cut animals out from herds, tested for weakness before committing to a kill. He saw the dark side too. Wolves turned on their own when resources got scarce. One mistake during a hunt could get you ostracized or dead. They're cold like that, Frank said. No second chances. He took notes on everything. Kills, tracks, scat, even how high they peed on trees. This stuff mattered to Frank. It wasn't just curiosity, it was survival knowledge. Understanding wolves meant understanding the wild. Even professional biologists eventually came to him with questions. A scientist named Adolph Murray used Frank's notes in his book, The Wolves of Mount McKinley. Government officials treated Frank like a field guide in boots. He knew wolves top to bottom, said trapper Oscar Vogel years later, taught me tricks I'd never thought of, and the twist? The more Frank learned, the less he hated them. Yes, he still trapped them when necessary. Yes, he still saw them as competition for game. But something had changed in his perspective. Eliminating wolves? Frank hated that idea, according to fellow agent Jim King years later. It wasn't about wiping them out. It was about balance. By his 50s, folks just called him the Wolf Man. A letter with just that name could still reach him in Fairbanks. He didn't pick the nickname, but it fit. He could track a wolf like it was his brother. He knew where they slept, where they crossed rivers, where they chewed bones in the sun. Frank wasn't soft, but he was fair. Wolves, he said, were survivors, and in Alaska, that was the highest compliment. But Savage River wasn't just about blood and biology. It was isolation, deep and harsh, the kind modern people can barely comprehend. Frank could go months without seeing another soul. Winter arrived early up there, usually by September. Snow buried his cabin to the eaves. Temperatures dropped past 50 below and stayed there for weeks. Firewood ran low. Frostbite took pieces of his ears, his nose, his fingers. Yet he never complained, never even seemed to notice the hardship. "I had what I needed," he said. "Meat, water, quiet. What else is there?" Sometimes midwinter he swore he heard voices, the isolation playing tricks on his mind. Once a grizzly raided his meat stash but left no tracks in the fresh snow. "Must have been a ghost," he said, maybe joking, maybe not. Up there, the line between reality and imagination gets thin when you go months without human contact. The solitude affected people differently. Some broke down, couldn't handle it. Frank seemed to need it, like most people need air. "You want to know what silence really sounds like?" he once asked a young trapper. "Come to my place mid-January. That's silence. So quiet, you can hear the blood moving in your ears." One winter, a storm pinned him in the cabin for 3 weeks straight, wind howling, snow piling up so high he had to tunnel out to check his traps. Most people would go stir-crazy. Frank just worked on his wolf notes, repaired gear, read the few books he kept. "Gave me time to think," was all he said about it. His day-to-day existence was all about routine. Wake with the dim winter light around 10 a.m, build up the fire, melt snow for water, check snares close to the cabin, split wood, repair equipment, feed the dogs, all of it harsh physical labour in killing cold. But there was peace in it too, a rhythm most of us will never know. The thing about Frank, one old-timer told me, he didn't fight against the wild. He just flowed with it, like water finding its way around rocks. Spring was the hardest time, when snow turned to mud, when rivers swelled with meltwater, when hibernating bears woke hungry. The cabin would start to leak, mould would grow in corners, the dirt floor turned damp. Ugliest damn time of year, Frank called it. But it brought fresh game, new wolf pups, a chance to repair winter damage, and the midnight sun, those endless summer days where it never gets truly dark. Time to range farther from the cabin, to explore, to build up stores for the next winter. Fall was his favourite. "Everything makes sense in fall," he wrote. Animals fattening up for winter, berries hanging heavy on bushes, the first dusting of snow showing tracks clear as a road map, the world preparing, like him, for the big freeze. In his 6th year at Savage River, the wolves changed, or maybe Frank's perception of them changed. He started seeing them not as competitors, not as subjects of study, but as neighbours, teachers. Something between fear and respect bloomed. A man can live his whole life in cities, surrounded by people, and never understand half of what a wolf knows by its first winter, he said. He gave names to the packs around his territory, the Ridge Pack, the River Pack, knew the alphas by sight, watched the complex social dynamics play out season after season, saw how they passed knowledge to younger wolves, how they adapted to changing conditions. One day, checking his traps, he found a massive black wolf caught by the paw. Most trappers would have shot it immediately. Frank looked at it for a long time. The wolf stared back, yellow eyes unblinking. No fear, just acceptance. Frank shot it, of course. That was his job, his living, but afterward he sat with the body for hours, skinning it with unusual care, saving not just the pelt, but the skull, the teeth, even the bones. Felt like I owed it that much, he told a ranger years later. That wolf died with more dignity than most men. This growing respect for his prey troubled him sometimes, made him question what he was doing, but he was still a practical man. Wolves competed for game he needed to survive. Sometimes they killed sled dogs or went after trap lines. Balance had to be maintained, yet his methods changed. He became more selective, wouldn't take breeding females if he could help it, left the pups unless they were starving, started to think more about the role wolves played in the ecosystem. In 1937, after 13 years at Savage River, something changed. Alaska was changing. More people arriving, more pressure on the wilderness. The federal government was taking a greater interest in wildlife management. Someone in an office somewhere had heard about the trapper who knew wolves better than anyone, who lived among them, who understood them. They offered Frank Glazer a job. Not just any job. They wanted him to be a government wolf hunter. It was a strange twist. The man who'd come to respect wolves, perhaps even love them in his own gruff way, was now being asked to systematically hunt them for the government, to help control populations across Alaska. "I didn't go looking for the job," he said later. "It found me." For Frank, it wasn't a contradiction. It was just another adaptation. Wolves themselves culled the weak from herds. They understood population control. Now he would do the same for them. He accepted the position, packed up his few possessions, took a last look at the cabin that had been his home for 13 years. Wasn't sad to leave it, he told a reporter once. Cabin was just a tool, like an axe or a rifle, did what it was supposed to do. But before he left, he buried something behind the cabin. Years later, a park ranger found it while mapping old structures. A small wooden box containing a complete wolf skull, carefully cleaned and preserved. Next to it, a scrap of paper with a single sentence. "The gentleman of the woods." It was the only sentimental gesture Frank Glazer was ever known to make. As he hiked out of Savage River that spring day in 1937, wolves howled from the ridges above, maybe saying goodbye, maybe warning others of his departure. Frank Glazer had entered the next phase of his life. Not just a hunter, not just a trapper, but a man with a mission to know wolves better than anyone else alive, even as he was paid to kill them. "It sounds like a contradiction," he admitted once. Maybe it was, but up here, life is full of contradictions. You kill to live, you love what you hunt. You're never more alive than when you're close to death. The cabin on Savage River still stands, or at least parts of it do. Park rangers have documented it. Historians have photographed it, a simple rectangle of rotting logs in a clearing, slowly returning to the earth. But for 13 years it was the centre of Frank Glazer's world, a place where he found himself, where he evolved from just another mountain man to something more complex, where the legend of the Wolfman was born. As you lie in your comfortable bed, so far removed from the harsh reality Frank embraced, you might wonder what drove him to that solitude, what kept him there for 13 years. Was it escape? Discovery? Something deeper? Frank, if asked, would probably just shrug and say, "It suited me." In that simple cabin with its dirt floor, with wolves howling outside and temperatures that could freeze mercury, Frank Glazer wasn't just surviving, he was becoming. The government job would take him all over Alaska, would put his wolf knowledge to the test, would transform him from observer to official predator. The Wolfman was about to hunt wolves full-time with the blessing of Uncle Sam. In 1937, Frank Glazer swapped his traps for a government badge. His new job? Kill wolves. No limits, no paperwork, just results. The US Biological Survey, which would later become the Fish and Wildlife Service, hired him for one reason. Nobody knew wolves like Frank Glazer. Nobody could track them, find them, understand them the way he did. He worked solo, as always. No office, no set hours, no boss breathing down his neck. Just wild, open Alaska and a mission. One week he'd be in the White Mountains with snowshoes and a rifle. The next, crawling across frozen tundra, tracking paw prints through silence so complete you could hear snowflakes land. Frank was happiest 100 miles from anyone, knee-deep in snow, chasing wolves, one agent said years later, and that's exactly what he did. This job suited Frank in ways his previous work hadn't. Market hunting had been about survival, making a living. Trapping at Savage River had been about independence, claiming territory. This government work, this was about mastery, about being the absolute best at something difficult. The spring after he started, he developed a system for finding dens. Wolves are secretive about their breeding sites, protective of their pups, but Frank could read the land like others read books. He'd spot a slight change in a female's movement pattern, notice tracks that circled back to the same area, observe how ravens flew in certain areas. When he found a den, he'd wait. Watch, learn the comings and goings of the adults. Then, when the time was right, he'd move in. Winter, he'd set snares along travel routes. Fall, he'd lay poison baits, careful to place them where other animals wouldn't find them. Once aerial hunting was allowed, he took to the skies. A spotter pilot would fly low over the terrain, looking for wolves against the snow. Frank would lean out, rifle ready, and take his shot. One shot, he said. Miss, they're gone. Hit, you've got meat. His success rate was incredible. Other hunters would spray bullets, hope for a hit. Frank waited for the perfect moment, then fired once. Clean, efficient, almost merciful. He mastered the getter, a cyanide trap disguised as bait. One sniff and the wolf dropped. It was quick at least. No suffering. Frank insisted on that. Every wolf he killed, he logged. How many, where, when, even the weather conditions. In some remote areas, his notes were the only official records of wildlife for decades. He didn't do this paperwork because it was required. It wasn't. He did it because he believed in knowledge, in understanding. Forms didn't make him deadly. Instinct did. He could read a single hair on snow like a detective. He knew the ridge they'd use, the creek they'd cross, where the alpha would mark territory. Frank could look at grass and tell you what wolves were thinking, one agent said. It wasn't an exaggeration. Locals, particularly the native Alaskans, called him Amaguk Frank, Wolf Frank. He spoke their language, not just the human dialects, but the language of sign, of track, of movement that told stories across the snow. He simply beat wolves at their own game. He became the apex predator in a land full of them. In 1948, the government sent him to Nunivak Island to protect muskox from local hunters. The native people there had been killing the animals, which were being reintroduced after near extinction. Most government men would have gone in hard, with rules and threats. Frank just talked to them, explained the situation, listened to their concerns. After that, the killing stopped, a pilot reported. They listened to him. He was straight with them. Frank never sugarcoated his work. Wolves breed fast, he wrote in a report. Traps alone won't cut it. You need poison, planes, den work. The whole deal. Hit hard, don't stop. But even as he said these things, even as he killed wolves more efficiently than any man alive, he respected them, admired them even. Long before GPS collars and remote cameras, long before wildlife biology was a common field of study, Frank was out there with binoculars, watching packs cross frozen rivers, mapping their movements, noting the alpha's lead position, the flanks, the way they herded caribou like soldiers on a raid. I don't mind shooting wolves, he wrote once to the Game Commission, but when I find one in my trap, I feel ashamed. They're the real gentlemen of the predatory family. It's a strange contradiction, to respect something so deeply while also hunting it. But for Frank, there was no contradiction. It was pure survival, pure ecology. Wolves themselves culled the weak from herds. They understood population control. Frank was just doing the same for them. He called himself a conservationist, yet joined predator control, raised wolf dogs, shot wild ones, loved their cunning, hated what they did to the herds. "You got to keep the balance," he said. "Too many wolves and you got no game." His bosses trusted him completely. There's something powerful in that, being so good at something so difficult that people just get out of your way, let you do what needs doing. "As long as I'm director, you've got a job," one boss told him. They'd let him disappear for weeks into the wilderness. He always came back with pelts and data. Frank would file his report, then get antsy to head back out, said one biologist who worked with him. Didn't matter how cold it got. That's when he felt most alive. He rode with university scientists and made them look like lost tourists. One professor watched Frank read the land like a book and said, "He's like an Indian. He knows every bump." With Frank, town life didn't stick. Never did. He kept a room at the Nordale Hotel in